Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. As you're joining us, be sure to check in the Q&A box. I'm sorry, in the chat box. We would love to see who you are and where you're from. We are super excited to have all of you here today. This is going to be a fantastic webinar, a really great opportunity for all of you to learn more about reframing middle school and adolescence. We have some amazing presenters. So as you're here, please log into the chat box, tell us who you are, where you're from. Make sure when you're posting in the chat box that you pay attention to the blue drop-down screen. Often it defaults to just sending messages to hosts and panelists. And we want to make sure everybody can see who you are and where you're from. So click on that drop-down menu and change it to everyone so we can all see your messages. Lovely to see you here. Hello, Kristen, my friend in Stafford. Nice that you could join us today. Hi, Alice from NAFSCI. We're super excited you're still here with us. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. One more quick reminder, as we go through the webinar today, you may have some questions that you would like to pose to our amazing presenters. Be sure to post those questions in the Q&A box. Our chat stream moves very quickly, as you can see, and we don't want those questions to get lost. So use the Q&A box if you have questions, but post your comments and engage with us in the chat box, and be aware of that drop-down menu so that you're chatting with everyone. So we will go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to this Effective Practices webinar on reframing adolescence and middle school family engagement. A couple of topics that are really important, and we are super excited about the presenters we have for you today. So next slide, Fred. As we go through our session today, here are the topics that we're going to be covering. First of all, we're going to start with the lovely and talented Marisa Pineau, who is going to talk about some of the work that the Frameworks Institute has done on framing adolescence and adolescent development. And then we're going to turn it over to the beautiful Hadley Bachman from the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center. And the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center has been doing amazing work on middle school and family engagement as long as I've known them. So she's going to share with us some strategies for collaborating with families for success in the middle grades. Then we'll have some time for Q&A, and don't forget to post those questions in the Q&A box, and then we will wrap up. So with that, I will turn it over to Marisa. Hello, Marisa.
Hi, Sherry. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as always, Sherry, just let me know if for any reason you can't see my slides. So there we go. So just to give all of you a little bit of background about who I am, why do we want to think about reframing adolescence, and particularly early adolescence, before Hadley dives into her really important work around this topic. The Frameworks Institute was asked, I think about 4 years ago now, by a group of funders to do some work on how to change the narrative around adolescence and adolescent development. Because as I'm sure you're all aware, there are a lot of really negative perceptions around adolescence, which can be damaging in a lot of different ways. So the Frameworks Institute worked very closely with a group of researchers on adolescent development. So these are researchers who do everything from brain development and neurology to studying how education can support adolescents, social sciences, hard sciences, et cetera, and also folks that work in the policy realm across a whole range of topics from education to criminal justice, et cetera. And what we did with them is we created what we collectively call the core story of adolescence. So this is the important things that we want everyone in this country to know about adolescence and adolescent development so that we can support every young person in having a healthy development that leads to a successful adulthood. So we did, Frameworks Institute, as part of this work, did several years of research with members of the public, with adolescents themselves, to find out how can we communicate these core ideas about adolescence in ways that help people better understand why this is such a critical period of time in all of our lives, right? We are all, anybody who's an adult was an adolescent, right, at some point. So how do we talk about this in more successful ways that really help people understand that adolescence is not a time that you just sort of have to get through. It's actually a time of remarkable opportunity when a lot of really important things are going on that we want to make sure we're supporting. So let me start with some very key facts about adolescence. Probably a lot of you know these already, but actually a lot of them we found in our research were really surprising to everyday people who don't know a lot about adolescence or work with adolescents. And the big thing is that adolescence lasts from about age 10 to about age 25. So this is a time of really remarkable social, emotional, and of course, biological growth. And the adolescent brain is actually uniquely designed for learning and for discovery. So a lot of scientists now say that adolescence is sort of the second critical period of growth after early childhood. And in some ways, your brain, your sort of social emotional growth, your biological growth is actually a lot more potentially is going on than in early childhood. And in early adolescence, which is about ages 10 to 14, which is when puberty is particularly important to your biological growth, it's really such an exciting time for young people. And we need to make sure that they have the opportunities to learn and discover, both so that they can have successful adulthood, but also as a time when we can potentially be addressing earlier adversity. It's a really important time for building resilience. What we need to ensure is that youth-serving systems like education are designed with this adolescent development in mind so that it is a time of opportunity and it is a time to build resilience. So those are sort of some really key concepts that we want to be talking about in these types of ways. So if we want to expand opportunities to experiment and explore, we need to do that to ensure healthy adolescent development. And how are we doing this? What's actually going on ideally during this period? Well, for one thing, young people need to have new and novel experiences. I think a lot of time the narrative around adolescence is that we sort of have to protect young people and keep them from having experiences that might not go very well or might be dangerous. But actually, because this is a time when there is remarkable brain development and that new experiences feed into that development, we need to give them opportunities to try new activities, to tackle new challenges and form new relationships. And of course, middle school is a really critical time for this. This is when we're thinking about, romantic relationships, when we might be doing more activities that are outside of home and outside of school specifically. We might be trying new sports or trying out theater, for instance. And this is really critical to helping us explore our identity and figure out who we want to be and what our place is in the world. And again, we want to make sure that we have systems in place, and education is so critical to this, that can support discovering in safe and satisfying ways. And that doesn't mean, again, like creating a wall around our middle schoolers to make sure that they never, encounter anything that's dangerous, but giving them opportunities to try, to fail, and then be able to try again. Another thing that is really important to understand and also to be able to communicate in your own work about adolescence is that young people they want to be and they are a force for good in our communities and in our society. When we're in adolescence, we're becoming much more engaged with the world. We're figuring out what's really important to us, and we want to make our mark. So we want to be important. And that's really critical, again, to our development. The important thing is creating systems where young people can connect to their communities, where they can connect to larger society. And this will help support their commitment to really making a difference. And then the next thing is that we want to make sure that all young people have the support they need to explore and discover. So, of course, the reality is that depending on what your background is, what your situation is in adolescence, the extent to which you have these opportunities to explore your interests and identities, might be more limited or might be more available. And of course, racism and poverty and marginalization are going to create higher obstacles and more challenges to discovery and to healthy adolescent development. So that's why we need to always be mindful, not just in our talk, but in our intentions and our programs and policies to addressing racial and social inequities, to make sure that all young people have these opportunities to explore, to try, to fail, to be able to try again, not only because it supports the healthy development of adolescents specifically, but it benefits all of us. It benefits us not just today, but it also benefits us into the future. So those are the key concepts of sort of core story of adolescence that are the most important things for us to understand about adolescence. And I think especially in early adolescence, when there is that sort of tension between wanting to protect them and the fact that they are transitioning out of childhood and into adolescence, and recognizing that if we want them to do well, we need to actually support discovery and learning and exploration. This is a particularly important time to understand how healthy adolescent development works, and to be able to talk about it in better ways so that we don't fall back on these sort of negative narratives of, the middle school years are just the worst years, that middle schoolers don't have any control over themselves, et cetera. Creating a narrative that's much more positive will help us support them in a much more positive way. So I am going to hand it over to Hadley.
Okay, just want to make sure everyone can see my screen and hear me. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to join you today. I'm the program manager of community development at the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center. And before joining the team at OSU, I spent my career as a teacher and administrator at the middle school level. And I am a middle school mom myself. My daughter just had her first day of 7th grade today. I'm sure many of you are middle school parents and work in middle schools. My daughter just transitioned back to in-person learning today for the first time in 18 months. So many of the strategies I'm going to be sharing in this presentation, I will be using again today as a mom engaging with my daughter's education. So I'm so excited to see you all today. And thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat earlier. So I'm going to share a sample story on the story of Mia, who is a representative of our experiences working with middle grade students and their families. So you will hear in this story the theme of remarkable opportunity that we know is true of early adolescence. While Mia is not a real person, her story is a common one for early adolescents and their families at the transition to middle school. And as we learn about middle school family engagement today, we will return to Mia's story to see how the research-based strategies apply to a real-world context. We're going to keep the engagement going in the chat, so Please stay close to your keyboards, and I'm excited to hear from you and collaborate with you today. So Mia lives with her father and grandmother. When Mia was in 2nd grade, she had only occasional homework assignments. Her teacher might send home a weekly spelling list, which Mia would practice with her grandma during bath time. Now she's a 6th grader and things have changed. Most of Mia's assignments are on Google Classroom. Her grandma's working second shift in the hospital, so Mia's dad is juggling, helping Mia with homework and shuttling her between sports and choir and the library. She usually has several different assignments from each of her classes, and it's hard for her and her dad to keep track of all the deadlines and requirements. She was always a good student in elementary school, but her grades have started to decline a little bit this year. And in the past, if Mia would get overwhelmed or behind in her schoolwork, her dad and grandma would monitor her schedule really closely. But when they try that now, it seems to backfire. Mia's not cooperating, she's forgetting her planner and procrastinating on her homework, and her grades continue to decline. School's different, and Mia is a young adolescent, and her family life is busier. So as we learn about middle school family engagement today, hold Mia's story in your mind. And as we learn some of these strategies, think about how can Mia's family and school collaborate for her successful transition to middle school. For today's presentation, I want to briefly share with you what I hope you'll gain. Our goal is to collaborate effectively with families of middle schoolers by identifying the factors that promote family engagement, identifying effective family engagement strategies for the middle school age, describing the importance of collective trust in family engagement, and one more I have to say, and applying effective middle school family engagement strategies. So I want to start with a little background about how family engagement happens and what it does for students. So family engagement isn't magic. You all know that. There are certain common factors that influence families engaging with schools. Hoover Dempsey and Sandler, many of you may be familiar with this model. Hoover Dempsey and Sandler created a model for family engagement. It starts with the pre-involvement of families and builds up to influence student achievement. So that pre-involvement row, those pre-involvement factors are the factors that contribute to families deciding to engage with the school in the first place. So why do families engage? Pre-involvement factors fit into 3 main categories in this model: personal motivators, perceptions of invitations for involvement, and life context variables. So to look at personal motivators, families are motivated to engage when their notion of what it means to be a mom, a dad, or a caregiver is to engage with the school in the way that the school is inviting them to be engaged. So this is called parental role construction. So an example of role construction would be a dad working on math facts every night in the evening because maybe his own dad was involved with him and helped, tutor him in math a little bit. And this would match the middle school teacher's expectation of parents working with their children in math. They're also motivated when they feel like they can make a positive difference for their child when they engage in the way the school invites them to. This is called parental efficacy. An example of parental efficacy for involvement would be a mom who believes when she checks in with her middle schooler about homework every day, her child will respond and be motivated to stay on task. Then looking at perceptions of invitations. Parents and family members feel invited and welcomed by the school when they receive general engagement opportunities from the school. So an example of a general school invitation, many of us at this time of year receive open house night invitations or information session invitations that go out to all families of students. So that would be a general school invitation. They also feel invited when they receive a specific teacher invitation. So an example of a specific teacher invitation would be maybe an intervention specialist contacting a family member to share a specific activity or strategy that that family member could do at home to help their child's progress. Finally, families also feel invited when they receive a specific invitation from their child. For example, if a child brings home a letter from a teacher about needing volunteers, maybe to go on a field trip, and then if the child asks their grandfather to volunteer to go along on that field trip, that would be a specific invitation from the student. And then looking at life context variables, their life context supports their engagement when they know how and have the skills to help their child with academics and social emotional learning. So an example of having the knowledge and skills to engage would be, for example, a parent understanding how algebra is being taught at school and then being able to help their child with that. Life context also supports engagement when they have time and energy. So an example of having time and energy to engage, this would be like when IEP meetings are scheduled at times and in ways that are convenient to parents and caregivers. So all parents have some time and energy. It's just whether or not that matches the school's expectations or the ways that the school is engaging families. And then finally, life context also supports engagement through the family's culture. So family culture includes lots of things. That can be our own family culture. It can be our larger social group that we are a member of. This could include expectations a family has for how adults should be addressed or how involved families should be in the school. So in a refugee culture, perhaps where the understanding of engagement with the schools is only the father engages with the teachers or only the father goes to the school. This could be a mismatch if the teacher's expectations for engagement might be that mothers are more involved and tends to make phone calls to the mom's number when there's behavior issues to address. So these three main factors, personal motivators, perceptions of invitations to be involved, and life context, these interact to influence a parent or caregiver's decision to engage with the school. So you might notice something missing, the idea that parents who get involved are the parents who care. So we maintain that all families care about their children, but maybe all aren't choosing to engage with the school in the way that the school is expecting, which should not be interpreted as a lack of caring. So instead, consider the pre-involvement factors that we discuss as we proactively plan how to promote family engagement for every family. So family engagement then takes several different forms. So in the chat, what does it mean to be an involved parent or caregiver, in your opinion? Fill in that sentence. Parent caregiver involvement means, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to be an involved, being present, connecting, showing up? Absolutely, showing up is a big one. I think that that's maybe a common way that we all think that what involvement means. I know in my family, I sort of thought that being an engaged parent meant that I had to go to every meeting at the school, but I'm also a student, and so that's really difficult for me. And so knowing that there is more than one way of engaging is very important and powerful. We often think of family engagement as just taking place at events that occur at the school, open houses, conferences, being on the PTO. Family engagement is much more, and it's vital to recognize all the ways that families engage to support their children. So these forms do fit into four main categories in this model. The first is values, goals, expectations, and aspirations. So parents and caregivers impart their values for education about why education is important. Parents and caregivers help their children set educational goals, and they communicate their hopes and expectations for their child's future. And all of that happens outside of the view of the school for the most part. And so that's a form of family engagement that's not as visible. The second form of family engagement is involvement at home, involvement activities at home. So this is things like engaging in their child's education by helping with homework, helping to organize backpacks and folders, reading with their child, talking with their child about what they're learning. Anybody who's a parent or caregiver of a school-age child knows that this is a large part of what you do. Last night I was helping my daughter tie all the straps on her backpacks so they weren't hanging so low. She was horrified by that. So, those are the things we do as a parent to help the school day go more smoothly. The third form of family engagement is communication. A lot of you talked about this. I noticed Iris spoke about it and several others in the chat. This is communicating with a teacher or other school staff about questions, concerns, and ideas they have for their child's education. It is also responding to parent or to school communications that are originating with the school. And this can take place in conferences, phone calls, emails, face-to-face conversations, really any way that you could communicate. And then the final form of family engagement is school-based engagement. So some parents and caregivers engage by volunteering at the school, by attending events, by attending IEP meetings. This is a visible form of family engagement. And while it's important, we shouldn't assume that families who do not engage in a school-based way are not engaged in other just as vital forms. So what is one new idea you have about what it means to be an engaged parent or caregiver? Do you have a new idea from that? Understanding expectations. Absolutely. You know, for me, I didn't realize that all those little things I did with my daughter in my house mattered so much that counted, so to speak. And we might not see that engagement. You know, my daughter's teachers might not know that I'm doing that at home, but it's really important. Discussing aspirations. Sherry, I know. Backpack straps, the things that this is a remarkable opportunity to work with her on her backpack straps. So as we're going to discuss in more detail, some of these engagement activities that I just discussed are more beneficial than others during the middle school years. So what does it mean for family engagement in middle school? So let's talk a little bit here about what makes middle schoolers unique. So in the chat, we're going to do a modified spirit read. So if you haven't done a spirit read in person, I'll just explain what that's like. So in a moment, I'm going to show you a text. It's pretty long. It's from a portion of our research brief that our center published on middle school family engagement. So as I read this text, you're just going to write one phrase from the text that stands out to you as particularly important or speaks to your experience with working with middle schoolers and their families. So you're going to write that into the chat, but you're not going to hit enter right away. You're not going to hit enter until I finish reading the entire text. So then I'll tell you, hit enter, and then we should see a flood of ideas about what stands out, and maybe some major themes will emerge. So remember, don't hit enter until I finish reading. So what makes middle schoolers unique? The transition to middle school, whether that happens at 5th, 6th, or 7th grade, poses unique challenges and joys for families supporting their early adolescence education. When early adolescents have several teachers, it's harder for families and teachers to develop relationships with each other. Early adolescents also desire more independence, while at the same time, they're still developing their own sense of confidence. If these challenges are not negotiated in ways that support their developmental needs at this critical stage, early adolescents may experience a drop in motivation, an increase in acting out behaviors, a decrease in confidence, and diminishing academic performance. Early adolescents are at risk of failing to reach their potential because of the changes in their development and school context, and they need special support to transition well to middle school. Research demonstrates that home-based family engagement that is aimed at supporting early adolescents' growing autonomy and confidence, while also focused on building early adolescents' academic skills, is most beneficial at the middle school transition. This type of engagement differs from the school-based family engagement strategies that are more effective at the elementary school level. Okay, hit enter. Oh, wow, so many. This is the largest group I've done this with. Seeing home-based, growing autonomy and confidence, unique challenges and joys. So here are some of the things that stood out to us. It's harder for families and teachers to develop relationships with each other. This is just simply a matter of numbers. First of all, my daughter has 7 teachers. It's not just the one classroom teacher that I needed to get to know. And her teachers have so many more students. They might have 150 students in a day, maybe 200. And so it's so much harder for us to develop relationships with each other. Adolescents desire more independence, but they're still developing their own sense of confidence, right? My daughter doesn't want me carrying her backpack inside for her anymore, but she wants to make sure her backpack looks just right because she's still developing that sense of confidence. And finally, home-based family engagement that's aimed at supporting her growing autonomy, so her independence, her confidence, and also builds her academic skills. This is what's most beneficial. And that was like a real eye-opener for me. So when we think about some of the ways we encourage families to be engaged in school when children are very young, like coming in to volunteer and read books, or events like classroom holiday celebrations, or being a room parent, those just don't fit as well in middle school. And this can be a big shock for families. It can leave families feeling stressed, confused, or helpless about what they can do to be engaged in their middle schoolers' education. I know that in my work at the transition years in middle school, often families were like, I really loved coming into the classroom. Why don't we have these classroom events anymore? And it's hard to explain exactly, but it honestly just doesn't fit what early adolescents would like to have happening at school. So we decided on our team to dig into the research to try to answer the question. So if it's not coming into the school, how can families best support early adolescents as they transition to and really throughout the entire time they're in middle school? And so here are some of the main themes that we found from the research literature. Early adolescents are at a unique stage of discovering their individual identities. They want their parents to be engaged, but in a way that allows them to be room to be self-sufficient. And when family engagement is tailored to fit the middle school age, kids are more self-confident, intrinsically motivated, and have more academic success. So before going further, what do you think this might look like in practice? Have any of you had experience effectively engaging families of middle schoolers? What worked? Feel free to post that in the chat. Career days that include parents, absolutely. Really highlighting the ways that parents have expertise to share with the community, I think is really important. Parent education classes, giving students some space to find themselves, maybe communicating that with families. Neighborhood pop-ups, I love that, heading away from the school building and into the community. Great, lots of great ideas. So our next step at the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center was to put together a set of strategies that the research on middle school family engagement has demonstrated as ways families can more effectively engage with schools during the middle school years. So these strategies are written for principals, teachers, counselors, people in the buildings, so that middle school staff can help families figure out the most effective ways to support their early adolescent learners. And then I also want to emphasize it's really important that teachers and school staff know and understand how family engagement looks different at middle school. Otherwise, it becomes an afterthought in the many other things that they encounter. So if you are not a classroom teacher or counselor, knowing these strategies can still help when considering how to support middle school students. So we are going to explore these in the context of Mia's story. So let's return to our story of Mia. So I'm going to present you with two scenarios that are a challenge for Mia, her family, and her teachers. So you heard a little bit of background about where Mia is. And the first one of these scenarios is focused on Mia's academic experience in middle school. As we then explore research-based strategies for middle school family engagement, keep thinking about how they apply to the scenario I'm going to share with you. So Mia's in 6th grade. She has 7 different classes, and she must keep track of her belongings in her locker and make sure she has the right materials for each class. She has homework most nights, but it's always a battle. Mia's grandmother reminds her to get started before grandma heads to her evening work shift, but Mia procrastinates, often chatting with friends or turning on the TV. And when Mia's dad gets home from work, Mia's usually behind schedule and she often can't find all the materials she needs. So an argument starts. This starts an argument. And the family's evening is spent with more frustration than they would like. Scrambling to find lost materials and tears or other tantrums. And Mia often says things like, why don't you trust me to get my work done? And we're not going to ever use this anyway. Mia's dad's frustrated too. It's hard for him to figure out the various organization systems that Mia's teachers are using. And some of the work looks different than when he was taught in school. He wishes it were clear what she needs to do and how he can support her. Lately, Mia's homework grades are slipping, and Mia says that all the other kids just get it. And Mia's dad isn't sure what she needs to work on more in order to improve. So what does the research say about middle school family engagement? How can Mia's family and teachers collaborate to support Mia's academic growth in ways that best fit her developmental needs? The first strategy that emerged from the research is that schools should promote awareness of the changing developmental needs of adolescents. And this connects with some things that Marisa shared. Adolescents are changing in a few key ways. They're exploring their autonomy or their independence. They need to understand how their actions are connected to results, and they need to believe that they have the skills necessary for success. So here are some opportunities that teachers and counselors can use. Provide opportunities in the classroom for autonomy development by encouraging participation in decision-making and self-regulation. So we can start on this strategy right away in the school by just how we teach in the classroom in middle schools. We can also explain to families how participation in family decision-making encourages healthy opportunities to practice autonomy. And this could be something little, like, maybe I have 2 or 3 meals I might be able to make tonight at home, and I can let my middle schooler have a little bit of a say or think through what would be good to have. Hosting family support meetings, webinars, or other online or in-person forums, and being sure to share ideas in accessible ways to families. And then remember that families are early adolescents' first and most enduring teachers. So just keeping in mind that respect for families, that they know their child best, and making sure to name that in conversations and interactions with families. Next, the research shows us that schools should provide families with information about how to navigate the middle school context. So remember that school has changed quite a bit. The middle schools that we experienced when we were 12 and 13 years old, they look a little different today. And parents can help students to successfully navigate this transition by developing a shared understanding about the value of academic achievement, by communicating their expectations about academic performance, and by ensuring that their children are utilizing appropriate study skills. But in order for families to do this, they have to understand what the middle school is like and how it's different from the elementary school. Some opportunities that teachers and counselors can use, they can develop a consistent system for academic organization and share that system with students and their families. And so what I mean by a consistent system is not only is this consistent within one classroom, but it's consistent across the classrooms of the different teachers within the same grade level. Introduce study skills and self-regulation skills that students can use at home and share these with families. A good example of this, last year my daughter was doing virtual learning, but her classes were meeting in a synchronized fashion. So she was having like actual math lessons, and she would get confused about what they were learning in math, and she would get really frustrated. And then I didn't know how she was supposed to even ask for help or how they had taught her to calm herself down. So I just asked the math teacher, who shared, they had a whole process, just like we do, Q&A. They had a whole process kids could use to ask for extra help. I just didn't know it. And so as soon as I knew it, then I was able to remind her, because once she's frustrated, it's hard for her to remember, oh, this is the way that you ask for help. This is the person you go to. This is how you can do it without looking like, you don't know anything in front of everybody. So those are really important for families to understand. And if teachers and school staff share that, that can really be empowering for families. Likewise, tell families how you can be reached for questions that they may have. So I may have questions for my daughter's teachers. And so knowing the best way to reach them and the best times of day to reach them and how quickly I might get an answer, that's all really helpful for me. And then communicate learning topics with families. This is really important. So families understand what's being learned in the classroom, and then explicitly link what is being learned in the classroom with future careers, and that helps families be able to talk about that with their children. The next strategy is to emphasize a growth mindset. Schools should emphasize a growth mindset in the classroom and provide families with ideas for how to encourage a growth mindset at home. Early adolescents who hold a growth mindset believe that with enough effort, they have the potential to learn just about anything. And when you have that growth mindset, you're more likely to engage in complex thinking. Kids are more likely to stretch themselves academically and to try out new strategies. Some opportunities that teachers and counselors can use can teach students to treat mistakes as opportunities to grow and help them to compare their initial performance to their performance after practice. So just like with some of the other strategies, first, as schools, we need to start with the strategy, putting the strategy into practice ourselves. Then share tips with families and collaborate on encouraging a growth mindset during homework time. And finally, adopt mastery-based grading practices. So this is grading practices where students have the opportunity to improve their grade with additional practice, and explain the grading practices to families. Allow early adolescents to revise and resubmit work until they hit a high bar. Our fourth strategy is to provide actionable and specific improvement messages to help families support their early adolescent. An improvement message equips families with specific information about what an early adolescent can do better and an affirmation that they can improve. So these support families in providing wraparound care for the academic and behavioral progress of early adolescence. Some opportunities that teachers and counselors can use. We can focus messages to families on concrete, actionable topics, such as missed assignments and study needs. So instead of just saying, your child's struggling in math, being really specific about what are the things that they can work on, what are the missing assignments, what study needs do they have, so that families can use that information at home. Then be clear about providing action steps for students and their families when addressing behavior concerns. So instead of just saying your child is disrespectful or disruptive in class, being clear about what would make the situation improve. So things like, I want to see your child come in and sit down and get started right away on our classwork. You know, that gives a family member something really specific they can talk about. Survey families at the beginning of the year to determine each family's preferred method and time of communication. So this strategy really requires quality communication. And so if we don't have ways of communicating, if we're using the wrong method, then it's a lot more difficult. Be proactive and address concerns when they're small and resolvable. Don't wait till it gets to be too big to handle. And then contact all families on a regular basis with these specific improvement messages. So if we have this growth mindset, we know that we can all improve with effort. And so being sure to contact all families rather than just the ones that particularly stand out. And then finally, and I promise we're going to get back to Mia's story, so kind of keep these in mind. Our fifth strategy that we recommend for schools is to encourage families to approach homework with positivity. Whew, this is a tough one. So when families can maintain a positive mood and outlook on homework time, even if there's occasional lapses into frustration, early adolescents may develop more of a growth mindset, less helplessness, an increased sense of autonomy, and greater control over their emotions. So opportunities that teachers and counselors can use. Well, first, design homework that is enjoyable and doable. So my daughter had a summer reading assignment. It sure helped me that her 7th grade English teacher had picked books that were all really fun and interesting. And then she made sure to give the kids a choice also. So I knew that it was already going to be enjoyable, and then my daughter was going to be able to pick a book that was at her correct level. And that was really empowering for us at home. Then really clearly teach early adolescent strategies to calm down when they're anxious or frustrated, and then share these strategies with families. That's so important. You know, it's not always going to be easy at home. And so making sure that you're teaching them those strategies. What do you do when you're frustrated? And then be clear about homework expectations. What's the purpose of homework? Is it just busy work, or do you have purpose behind it? How much homework will there be? How frequently will there be homework? That's so helpful as middle schoolers get busier with activities outside of school. It's really helpful to know, well, on every Tuesday, we're going to have a homework assignment that's due on Thursday. And so then we can work around that as a family. And then how is homework communicated? Is it going home in messages? Are students writing it down in planners? How are we even going to know about this homework? Again, let families know how they can reach you for questions. And then invite feedback from families. This one's rarely done, but so powerful. Invite feedback from families about how the homework process is going at home. When I was an English teacher, I created assignments that I thought were so cool. And then I was always really surprised about that sometimes they were too easy for students. Sometimes they took them way too long. And so asking families how homework is going at home helps you adjust your practices so you're making sure to tailor things correctly for your students and their families. Okay, so we've discussed 5 strategies that relate to middle school family engagement to support early adolescent academic growth. So we're going to think back to Mia's scenario. What strategies apply? So if you remember, Mia's disorganized with her materials. She's procrastinating, and homework time is a frustration for Mia and her dad. Her dad's often confused about the teacher's systems and strategies. So if you were her teacher, counselor, or principal, what would be your next steps to effectively collaborate with her family to support Mia's academic growth? So you can respond to these in chat. So what ideas could her school use to more effectively collaborate with her family? It sounds like her family wants to help. I'm sure her teachers and school want to help as well. What strategies could they use? Yes, Ricky, absolutely. Starting with communicating what those homework requirements are. Focusing on number 4. So if there are some things that need to be improved academically, making sure that it's specific and it's something that can be can be acted upon, giving her choices in homework, helping her become more organized. And maybe that's a matter of the school needing to more consistently set up a system for organizing work. Personally contacting the family, just that, one-on-one contact, knowing who to contact, right? There's so many people at a school. Who do I even contact for help? Okay, so I'm going to check in. So here's kind of my ideas of what could have happened. Let's say they used all of these strategies. Here's what's going on now. So after a few weeks of Mia procrastinating and then feeling stressed about getting everything done, Mia's dad and several of her teachers start communicating regularly via email. I think I saw communication in that idea thread. And Mia and her dad found a system that works for them. So as soon as Mia gets home, she has a snack and gets those chores done so she's not feeling stressed later. Then Mia gets out her newly designed homework folder that she's using to keep track of work to be done and work to turn in. And she settles in at the kitchen table. So we've got this common space while her dad starts dinner. So Mia's math teacher makes sure that students have time to start on their homework at school. And she includes written directions and example problems on every assignment. If Mia starts getting frustrated, her dad has her take a break and reminds her to look at the written directions and the example. At Mia's parent-teacher conference, Mia's math teacher asks for feedback about how homework is going, whether it's too much, and how Mia handles moments of frustration. She gives Mia and her dad some new ideas about how they can tackle assignments when Mia feels frustrated. So as you can see, applying these middle school family engagement strategies, these are making a difference for Mia. So the second part of Mia's story is focused on Mia's social experience in middle school. So as we explore the next set of research-based strategies for middle school family engagement, think about how these might apply to this scenario. So 6th grade is a big transition for Mia socially. Her middle school brings together several different elementary schools, and suddenly there are a lot of new people to get to know, and Mia isn't quite sure how she fits in. It seems like everyone has a phone and social media, and she feels like she's missing out. Mia has asked for a phone for her 12th birthday because she knows her friends often text each other late at night. She feels like she's missing things because they often laugh about their group chat when they sit together at lunch. Mia's dad has noticed that she seems a little withdrawn when he asks her about friends. He wonders what her teachers and counselors notice about her behavior in class and whether she's making friends, but he doesn't know who to contact to ask. So what does the research say about middle school family engagement for social emotional development? How can Mia's family and teachers collaborate to support her social growth in the way that best fits her developmental needs? So our 6th strategy is for teachers to partner with families to provide age-appropriate and supportive routines and structures. So we all know this is hard. Anybody who's raised a middle schooler. Early adolescents crave independence at a time when they are still developing self-control and the ability to predict the long-term consequences of their actions. So therefore, it's a delicate balance for families and schools to work together to provide age-appropriate and supportive routines and structures. Effective and supportive monitoring means being aware without being too intrusive and encouraging openness and honesty. So some opportunities that teachers and counselors can use. These include explaining to parents why collaborative rule setting is supportive of early adolescents' developmental needs. So collaborative rule setting is something that's often used in schools. We set classroom rules together, not every teacher, but it's a common one. Deciding on a set of classroom rules together and maybe even signing a contract together. So explaining to families why that's important, why it supports their desire for some autonomy, their desire to have a voice can be really powerful for families. Building trusting relationships with early adolescents in your school and their families is also very important. So each child in the school, each early adolescent in the school needs at least one adult that they feel like they can trust. And then adults need to really reach out so each family feels like they have an adult that they can trust. Providing families with information about current social media platforms early adolescents are using and ways families can monitor their early adolescents' online behavior. This one is huge. So when I worked in middle schools, I did not have my own middle schooler. She was younger than that, but I feel like I knew like every tip and trick kids were using to get on social media when their parents thought that they weren't on social media, and different apps and platforms that families had never even heard of. Schools often hear about those before families do because they have so many more students in the building than families have children in their house. And then now that my own daughter is kind of getting into that stage, I use that prior knowledge I have quite frequently to think about, the things that she could be up to when she's getting on a computer. The school has an iPad for her. So just talking with her about those things, it would be really powerful for schools to provide families with that information. And then finally, raising awareness with families about typical risky behaviors that early adolescents may encounter or may try out, and how to have conversations about peer pressure. Often those risky behaviors can pop up earlier than we as parents or family members expect. And that can be particularly true for grandparents who are the primary caregiver of their children. That might take them by surprise, some of the typical risky behaviors that are being encountered with peers. And so just talking about how to have those conversations is really important. Next, we suggest that teachers and counselors collaborate with families to create a sense of belonging at school and at home. So I touched on this a little bit with the last strategy, and now we're going to talk about it some more. So the transition to new middle school environment, often with new peers and teachers and expectations, can lead to an early adolescent feeling anxious, insecure, and more likely to withdraw or act out. Families, teachers, and counselors can support early adolescents by being available in times of distress, providing security and comfort, and being personally involved with what is happening in their lives. So the first opportunity that teachers and counselors can use is to share about positive childhood experiences and how these benefit early adolescents now and in the future. So some of you may have heard of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. There's new research about positive childhood experiences, and that those are really a benefit to students' health, to students' academic development. And one of those positive childhood experiences is having adults who care, who are not related to them. And that's something powerful that schools can do. So I'm going to give you a link that has our research brief later on, but if you read a little bit more about positive childhood experiences, those are just like a really hopeful part of work about early adolescence that I would really encourage you to look into. Can also foster a sense of belonging at school through clubs, lunch groups, advisories, things like that, to make sure that all students feel like they belong. Collaborate with families to ensure that early adolescents are developing healthy friendships. So this is big. Families only know what's happening at school through their own child's eyes. And so helping families to note that, or to notice whether or not adolescents are making friends at school and whether those friendships are healthy ones, that can really help families at home with the conversations that they have with their children. Thank you, Ellis, for posting that in the chat. And then be an advocate for early adolescents that you work with, and let their families know that you are available as a supportive adult outside the home. And I think this is just one of the middle school best practices that, if schools can designate an advisor or a homeroom teacher that's really that point person, that's very powerful. Next, teachers, counselors, and families should work together to communicate and model confidence in the early adolescents' abilities. So early adolescents need their families to help them develop 3 motivational resources to help them be successful in school. So these are the 3 things that they're going to draw on anytime they need motivation. First, the understanding that their actions are connected to future success or failure. So like what I'm doing right now is going to matter for my future. Then the belief that they can carry out the actions necessary for success. So first I see that actions relate to consequences. Then I see, okay, we all would like success. So the belief that I have that ability as an adolescent to do the things I need to do to be successful. And then finally, the belief that they are choosing that action for themselves and it's going to lead to that successful outcome. So those 3 things together really help with early adolescent motivation. So here's some things you can do. First, brainstorm with families how to provide leadership opportunities for early adolescents, both at school and at home. And so leadership opportunities can be built into family life. We have lots of tasks and things that happen in our household: caring for younger siblings, caring for a pet, helping out at grandma's house. All of those things are opportunities that can be framed as leadership for early adolescents. Then share tips for how early adolescents can practice the skills they're learning at school in their home and community. They're learning leadership skills at school. How can they practice those skills in the home and community? Maybe they can mentor a younger sibling and how to handle frustration. That would be really powerful. Our third opportunity is to implement student-led conferences. These are really powerful when students have a voice in their own conference, when they're really leading and showing their academic progress, their social emotional progress. And we really encourage that, especially at the middle school level, it's so important to have students leading those conferences. Encourage early adolescents to reflect on their graded work and to share their reflection with their families. So it's not just you get a grade, but it's you think about how you got your grade, all of the work that went into it, and then sharing that reflection with your family. Again, providing specific and positive feedback on assessments. So not just saying you could do better, but what exactly could get better? What could you do next time? And then what did you do well? And then finally, connect choices and outcomes. So every kid, every person is going to make mistakes. So treating those mistakes as an opportunity for learning, like sitting down and saying, what could you have done differently? What choices could you make that were different? And really seeing yourself as early adolescents, seeing themselves as people who can make a difference in their own lives. Okay, last strategy, and then we're going to return back to Mia. So finally, all middle school staff members should value home-based involvement. So this is partly just a mindset shift that needs to happen for school staff. So this home-based involvement is the most impactful and developmentally appropriate form of family engagement. So traditionally, family engagement is thought of as direct involvement on the part of the family with the school through volunteering, contacting teachers, etc. When my daughter was younger, if she had a problem at school, then I would reach out to the school myself. Now, after engaging with this research, if she has a worry about what's going to happen at school tomorrow, I encourage her to email her advisor or ask the next day when she gets to school, or talk to her about how she can solve that problem at school when she gets there. We now know that being involved with early adolescents at home is the most impactful and developmentally appropriate form of family engagement at this middle school transition and throughout middle school. And educators can and should help families to understand effective family engagement at that middle school transition. So some opportunities: tell families about the value of home-based involvement and express appreciation for their sometimes unseen efforts. Just saying thank you for all the ways that you are involved at home, that can be so powerful. Communicate to families what they need to know in order to support learning. So making sure that families are empowered with all of the knowledge and skills they need so that they can support that learning at home. When speaking to colleagues, highlight the importance of developmentally appropriate middle school family engagement. So instead of getting pulled into that negative talk about families and middle schools, really highlighting that families could be doing a lot of things that we don't see in the building. And finally, celebrate early adolescents' achievements with their families as partners in launching success. This is so important. We celebrate often with the students themselves, their success, but really speaking to families and appreciating their efforts as partners in that success. Okay, so we have discussed 4 additional strategies. I put the first 5 up there too in case we want those to support early adolescent social growth. So what strategies could apply to Mia's scenario? So as you may remember, she was having trouble connecting with friends. She felt like she was missing out because she didn't have a phone or social media. If you were her teacher, she's asked for that phone, remember? So maybe they're going to be getting her a phone. If you were her teacher, counselor, principal, what would be your next steps to effectively collaborate with her family to support Mia's social emotional growth? So let's get some ideas going in the chat. I'm seeing some number 7s. Creating a sense of belonging. Yeah, how could we as the school create that sense of belonging? Maybe we can help her have a lunch buddy. Communicating and modeling confidence, valuing what her families are doing. I think that number 6 is really important, especially with the phone and the texting, that there could be some opportunities to help her family understand the structures and routines that might need to go with that. Seeing a lot about communicating, modeling confidence. Just saying it's okay. Tomorrow will be a little easier with friends. I think that's really important. Helping dad understand social media, absolutely. 7 and 8. Suggesting a club or activity. Maybe calling up her family and saying, you know, I really noticed that she is excellent at taking on different characters in our drama class. She should join the play. You know, sometimes it's just getting involved with a group of peers with like interest. Yes, meeting with dad and hearing from dad and grandmother, things they've tried at home, things that have worked for her in the past. I think that's also really important as well. So for Mia's 12th birthday, Mia gets that smartphone she asked for. At the September open house, Mia's school counselor gave a presentation to parents about young adolescent development, and she included some tips about setting rules together as a family and explained why this collaborative process helps young adolescents practice responsible decision-making. Mia's school counselor also provided parents with a list of various social media platforms being used by students, along with suggested conversation starters that family members can use with their teens to have informal, non-threatening conversations about social media. This was a good reminder for Mia's family about why and how they can work with Mia to develop healthy boundaries for cell phone use. So they decide to talk about it over dinner. They discuss with Mia problems she's noticed her friends have with their phones. Mia mentioned several problems. If you have an early adolescent, they're so great at pointing out the problems that their friends have. And so that's a good place to start. She's noticed that they have distraction of apps during class. They're exhausted from late night texting. So Mia's grandmother asked her what ideas she has for healthy limits with her cell phone. She's a little surprised to be asked for her opinion. She suggests having her phone off and in her locker at school, putting her phone away during dinner time, turning it off at certain times in the evening. Mia's dad suggests that they charge the phone downstairs at night, and Mia's grandmother wonders what might be a natural consequence if the cell phone starts intruding on school or family life. Mia suggests that if she can't monitor her own time on the phone, then they could set up limits on the phone itself. So once the family discusses and agrees on each of the rules, they all feel confident that they have a plan in place for Mia to be successful with this new responsibility. So as you can see, developmentally appropriate family engagement at the middle school level helps schools and families collaborate together to launch early adolescence academic and social success in the middle school years. So where can you go to learn more about the research and access tools for your school and community? So we have resources and tools to help at our center. If you want to learn more about the research and access tools for your school, you can go to our website where you'll find the full research brief with more information and tips on each of the strategies that we talked about today. That's what the research brief looks like. We also have a tweet series bundled for you that you can share on social media. We often share those on our center for our middle school Mondays. These tips are written for families in an ordinary and accessible language. We also have a one-page tip sheet infographic for families that would be perfect for you to take to your middle school transition events or back to school nights. And so all of these materials that are written for families, both the tweet series and the infographic, those also come translated in Spanish, Arabic, Somali, Nepali, and Chinese simplified. And then finally, we also have a monthly news and guidance email that includes theme-based advice for teachers and other school professionals about how to implement best practices for family engagement in your school. So we have an issue on middle school family engagement that goes over many of these strategies that you can access in our archives. And then also encourage you to sign up to receive our news and guidance, which you can do right from our website. Thanks, Alice, for posting the link. And then read past issues at the link on that slide. And then one other thing to mention, our team recently had an article published in School Community Journal. I think it was in this most recent volume about middle school family engagement that includes just a really thorough literature review of the best strategies for middle school family engagement. And so the link to that is also on our website at the one that Alice posted in the chat. And then one last thing, another way you can keep learning, our center is hosting the 2021 Family Engagement Leadership Summit on September 17th. The Ohio Family Engagement Leadership Summit's a day of professional learning and connecting virtually with those dedicated to advancing effective family school community partnerships across Ohio and beyond. This is hosted by us, and it brings research to action by providing schools, families, and community partners with the tools you need to work together to launch all children to success. We have a session that we're hosting in this. That is a local middle school who has actually tried implementing our strategies. They partnered with us last school year, and so they're going to present about how that went for them. So if you're actually interested in hearing about how these strategies worked in real time, you'll want to come to that and make sure to attend that session. It is free, and so you can learn more and register. Let's see if I can get a link in the chat. I might have to do that as we're doing the question and answer. Or actually, Meredith has posted it already in the chat. All right, and then just thank you for joining me. And this is my center website. You can connect with us on Facebook and by email or on Twitter or on our website if you'd like to reach out to us. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can have some time for question and answer.
Thank you so much, Hadley. This was fantastic as always. I continue to be in awe of the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center, and you and the rest of your team are just amazing. So really, really excited to see all of this content that you shared with us today. So we are going to turn to the Q&A box now and see if we have any questions for you or for Marisa. So the first question that we have is, how would one get all teachers and staff on board with these strategies? One unhealthy relationship with an adult at school can lose trust quickly, which is really true. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I have a couple ideas, and then I think that I would also, I think Marisa would have some ideas around some of the frameworks work around framing that might be really valuable on this one as well. I think I am a educational leadership PhD student, so I'm going to say this is absolutely the responsibility of the school leader to set this tone right away. You know, middle school leaders and their district administrators really getting on board with family engagement as a priority, and then also how that looks different at the middle school level. I think that that's so essential. And then I think also just like a great deal of humility, going into this with a great deal of humility in terms of particularly working across cultures, being aware of the biases that you bring to those. I think that's really valuable in terms of being able to build trust with people and positioning yourselves as a learner. So several of these strategies really like emphasize that we want to empower families to be able to do the things that they already want to do well. But then it's also a matter of, you know, being sure to lean into some of those strategies that talk about listening to families, listening for feedback about homework. I think that builds trust when you, as a family member, realize that the school really values your opinion about how things are going and how the experience is working for your child.
Yeah, Marisa, do you want to speak to any of the recommendations frameworks might have for how we communicate about this type of thing?
Sure. I think that this is a really great place where our work on adolescence and our work on framing school, family, school, and community engagement actually really overlap in wonderful ways. And I think sort of fundamentally the lens that we take on framing is that everyone needs to sort of be on board and view engagement and also view adolescence in much more positive ways and have a better understanding of what it looks like to have great engagement and what it looks like to support healthy development. And that includes teachers, it includes, you know, other educators, it includes families, it includes everyone who might be in adolescents' lives, community members as well. So I think the tools that we have around communicating about engagement and about adolescence that we have on our website, and I'm sure Alice can drop some links in there, are going to be really helpful. And the slides that I actually presented you all at the very beginning, the sort of main headline slides are all ones that we have as part of our adolescence toolkit on our website, that you can actually even just download those slides and sort of, you know, even if you're not giving a presentation, they have those core concepts around adolescence that you want to be communicating to anyone that you're talking about why this is so important, that you can draw on. And I do want to say too that Hadley's presentation is like the perfect example of how you talk about adolescence and engagement in middle school in really well framed ways. So you can take a lot of tips and cues from what she just presented.
Yeah, I think everything about Hadley is perfect. So I second that for sure. Here's a question that's actually for me. So I'm going to go ahead and answer it. This question is from an anonymous attendee, and they said, is there any way or opportunity for those on this call to have the opportunity to be connected and share contacts with one another for future collaboration if needed? Would like to be able to reach out to one another. Thank you. Anonymous attendee, you have that opportunity by connecting with each other on the NAFSCI Member Connect platform. So we don't ever share like lists of people who've registered for our workshops or webinars, but we do have that opportunity. If you go on the NAFSCI Member Connect platform and you start a thread about adolescent development and family engagement, then anybody here is a member of NAFSCI will be able to see that and participate that way as well. So I would encourage you to do that. Here's another question. I'm going to open this up to everyone. How can schools encourage overworked and underpaid teachers to make time to engage their parents? It's a big question. Anybody want to start?
I was an overworked and underpaid teacher. I would say that schools helping to share with teachers, just highlighting the benefits that there are for teachers. This is frameworks work, but it's so true. And before I even knew about frameworks, I was saying that it just makes your job so much easier when you hear from families, when you get their input, they know their kids best, you know, and just using the partnership language, the language around, you know, that launch, and we're all working together on a team. I think that's just really powerful. And so it's not just about, I think sometimes we make a mistake about framing family engagement like it's going to help families, but it also really helps us as teachers. And so like emphasizing that this will make your job easier, particularly all that time you invest on building those relationships at the beginning of the year will pay dividends later on, when some of that shiny behavior wears off.
Yeah, Marisa, do you want to talk about maybe foregrounding benefits or interdependence?
Yeah, so what Hadley just said is exactly what we found when we actually did some of our research around framing engagement with educators themselves. That sort of argument that this is an opportunity for families and parents to rely on one another, which actually makes supporting our students, our middle schoolers, in some ways easier, is a really great way to sort of bring educators into the conversation instead of starting off with, and now we're going to do this new or extra thing, which very quickly turns into, wait, why are you making things harder for me? So starting with that sort of interdependence, this is how we're going to rely on each other, and that's going to make things a lot better for all of us, is a great way to sort of start that conversation. And then the other thing that we found is that talking about benefits for teachers, not just with teachers, but with members of the public, is actually a really great way to get members of the public, not just parents, but people, whether they have children or not, to see how important engagement is. They recognize, I think, the benefit to students already, but not so much necessarily the benefits to teachers. And then when they learn about that, it's really positive. So, and then I think when you want to talk about benefits to parents, the best way to do that is to have parents themselves talk about the benefits to them and really sort of put a face on it by having a parent be the messenger and talking about the benefits for them.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Here's a question from Ricky. Hi, Ricky. Are there strategies that you would suggest for a district that transitioned from pre-K to 8 schools to suddenly having middle schools 6 through 8? Parents have gotten used to sending all kids to one building, and some of them are not happy about the change. Anybody have any ideas for that?
That sounds tough.
Yeah.
So Ricky, a couple of things that popped into my mind is that there might be two things that you'd want to think about. First, that strategy number 2, that's providing families with information about how to navigate the middle school context. You're going to want to be really clear with families about how this is different from that K-8 building. So is the 6-8 just the same way that the K-8 building was running those grades, or are there key differences? And so this might be a time for the staff to think about, what was gained by changing to a 6-8 building, what was lost, and then being clear about those with families and why the district made that decision. I think that that's really important. Like the more that you can do to help them like feel like they're part of the building, feel like they understand their students' day and what the value is to this, because there certainly are some values to having that 6 through 8 band together in a building. I think that would be really important. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about is just trust. And so it sounds like this might have eroded some trust with families. There's some really powerful research about how collective trust works in schools. I would recommend any of Wayne K. Hoy's work in that area, but really focusing on emphasizing those ingredients to trust, the reliability. You can count on me, that I care about you, I'm benevolent, that we're good at what we do, and we're being open and honest about what's happening. And so just like building those in, and if some of those fell by the wayside, maybe this decision, families didn't feel like they had enough input, it's probably time to emphasize some of those now. But that's really hard. Change is hard for everybody, and this is a tough time right now to encounter any more change. People are at sort of their max capacity for change.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. I think those are great suggestions, Hadley. Here's a question from Marty. For many parents, the first person they encounter in a school is the office staff or secretaries. It's so important that there's a welcoming and helpful atmosphere. So I'm not sure what Marty's question is, but I guess I would tag on to that. How do we help front office staff gain these skills in talking about adolescence and talking about adolescence with families in particular?
Marisa, those sound like some framing questions, both framing, how could staff secretaries kind of frame both adolescence and also what's like the key message about family engagement that you would want them to kind of be able to speak to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's also for them, it's very much a tone thing as well. So as important as sort of the words and the ways in which they talk about what an exciting time, welcome into our school. It's so exciting to have young people here who are doing all these new things and learning and discovering. But from everything that I understand as well, from now being around family, school, community engagement folks for a number of years, just that welcoming tone is so important. And I think the frames fit into that welcoming tone because they're very much about positivity, and that, it's not that we need to be really, really worried and always cautious about young people and, sort of gatekeepers. It's about actually being there to scaffold them and to help them and to welcome parents and families and community members into that fold. So.
Yeah, I would add to that, having done so much work in visiting schools to help them identify strategies they're using that either inhibit or enhance family engagement opportunities, front office staff play a super important role. They can actually sometimes make or break relationships that families have with schools. So I think for this, Marty, you want to start with your building level leadership and make sure that your front office staff have opportunities to participate in training and professional development that help them build those customer service skills, and also make sure that they're aware of the proper framing when it comes to how they talk about family engagement. I've been to lots and lots of offices where they are not always super excited to be there, and they let you know as soon as you walk in the door, and that tends to make families not want to visit anymore. So really making sure that leadership are on board with this, that they're creating a culture and a climate that is welcoming to all visitors, and that they're ensuring that front office staff get the kind of training and PD that really help them understand how important their role is and gives them the tools that they need to really make people feel welcome when they walk in the door. Excellent question, Marty. Thank you. Here's a question. I think this one's for you, Hadley. Do you have a similar presentation compiled for a middle school parent audience, something that's parent focused?
Yeah, we have done a few learning sessions for middle school families. They've mostly been on a smaller scale, like not a big, big presentation like this one. And we're actually doing a few in Ohio locally, but many of those are in person. And so we don't have like recorded sessions, but you could take our materials that are available on our site, and you could easily turn those into opening sessions for families. Particularly, I think it would be really important to do that kind of at the end of the year prior to a transition, and then also right away during a transition year.
Yeah, thank you. I want to encourage everybody, if you haven't already, bookmark the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement website. There are just so many resources there. I use it all the time. And also bookmark the Frameworks website. I don't know if they're still doing the Institute, Marissa, but the Frameworks Institute, I went through that and it really taught me so much about the way that I communicate. It was really invaluable. Also, a lot of great resources on their website. They have worked on framing a lot of different issues. So there may be things beyond engagement and middle school that you have an interest in that would really, you would enjoy the website. Bookmark it. Here's a question from Trinice. Trinice wants to know, how has culture and time changed the way family engagement is achieved? It's a big question. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
The first thing that popped into my head was just that the idea of middle school, the concept of middle school, is actually like a fairly new one in education. So before, we had primary schools and secondary schools, and everyone attended primary school. And then at secondary school level, that was really for the students that were heading in an academic track. And a lot of kids were, they went to work in the early 1900s. They were working in factories or on farms. And so that's one major way that culture and time have changed the way family engagement is achieved. There didn't used to be this idea of families needing to engage in schools in middle school because it wasn't around then. Mm-hmm. Which might be why it's a little bit of a forgotten time period.
Right. And it's hard. People don't really know. They haven't learned as much about adolescent development. I'm not sure if the research is catching up now, so we have more opportunities to learn that, but it is really hard.
I think with the development part, it is the case that there have been a lot in the past 10 or 15 years. We understand a lot more than we did before. And now we're really at that place where communicating about those findings has become so critical, so that we can make sure that these systems that, youth serving systems, and of course, middle school is like a critical part of that, are changed and improved in ways that serve the needs that we now know young people have. So, later school starts, for instance, is something that has become really important in the past, 8 years or however long it's been. And we didn't know all that not very long ago, how important that was. And, it's certainly the case. To go into a tiny bit of a tangent, I also have a middle schooler. They started the high schools later in the district I live in, but sacrifice the middle schoolers, and they are the ones that start at 7:30 in the morning. And, we know from adolescent development, sleep's just as important to them. So we are catching up and communicating about why these things are so important to, other educators, to parents, to school boards, is really, really important.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, here's a question from an anonymous attendee. What if you're having a problem with the school being transparent? Like they really do not share information parents need to know, or if they must do it, it's last minute. It seems like the school is being cagey. How do I, as a parent, approach that conversation without it being problematic? This is a middle school, by the way. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Hadley?
I was gonna ask Marissa if she had thoughts on that. 'Cause again, I think that some of the way that frameworks teaches you to communicate can be so helpful with those tricky conversations, no matter what side you are coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it sounds, as Sherry has said several times now, the school leadership is, so again, not being an engagement expert, but playing one on webinars, are so critical to what happens at a school and the parents' impressions. I mean, but I think one thing I would do is approach them as, I am a parent who wants to work with you, and maybe ideally have a group of parents, right? And talking about the benefits to yourself and talking about the ways in which you all rely on one another to make sure that your students are doing well. I think that that's the right approach, and sort of coming from the assumption that we all have our students' best interests at heart, and let's work together to do that. And as parents, we know that this is really great for us in these ways, but also we know it's going to benefit you all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I actually fall back on some of my advocate training, that because I started my career as an advocate for families. And so for me, I know it's very intimidating for individual parents or family members to go to the school and ask for these kinds of things. And I think there's more confidence when you have more numbers. So I would say if you've got a friend or two, take them with you. And so when you're initiating these conversations, it's not just one parent, it's a group of constituents. I think that's a really important part of it. And also, after you visit, send them a lovely thank you note and say, I really appreciate the time that we spent talking about this. Here are the things we talked about and what you agreed to do for me. Because then you're also creating sort of a documentation, which hopefully you will never need. But if people forget, or if something happens and nobody follows through on that, you can always reference that if you have to go back and have that conversation again.
the only other thing I would add to those is just that I think if you enter into this kind of naming and presuming a positive intent, even if you maybe don't always feel that way yourself, and then in the parent sessions I've done or family sessions I've done, a simple strategy that you can use when you're talking with school personnel is I call it the sandwich method. So you start with something positive that you genuinely believe that the school is doing well. And then in the middle, here's my ask, and here's that, and that goes back to that specific and actionable, right? Some things that they could specifically improve on. It sounds like from that comment, you've got some of ideas that could be easily done, actionable, and then ending with a positive and kind of this, and I know we're going to be able to do this together. I think that strategy, school people are busy and they're in it for the kids and they want things to be successful. And so if things aren't going right though for families and they're not hearing enough information, I think it's fair to share that, but just also then, naming that the school's probably trying, there's some positive things that they're doing as well.
Yeah, I love the positive intent thing too. I think that's so important, Hadley. We should always assume that all of us are doing this because we care about our children. And even if people aren't doing it the way that you want them to do, they're doing it the best way that they know how. And so having that as your core fundamental belief really helps you to have those positive interactions with whoever you're interacting with at the school. Okay, so here's another anonymous question. Can we share the slides with families as we start the new school year? Very useful information for parents.
For the middle school strategies, my slides are more focused for school staff. I would actually suggest that you take our tweet info, like our infographic and our kind of tweet messages, and create your own slides out of those. I think that would be a lot more powerful because they'd be focused to parents.
Excellent. And Hadley, here's another one specifically for you. Are you available to do virtual family engagement parent workshops?
I have, let's see, I'm going to put in the chat a speaker request form, and this is from our center. And so you can see we've got a lot of talented people on our team, and I'm just one of them. So you can request a speaker on there and we can see what we can do. And I would love to help out, particularly direct things to families. You know, if you have a group of families that you feel like would really benefit from some of the middle school strategies, but just know that it will be much more powerful if you are also training your staff in the family engagement strategies for middle school as well. So it's not just, it's definitely not just families that need to be fixed in this situation. So
it's dual capacity, really. Yes.
Absolutely.
And then our final question is from Laura in Maryland. Laura said, I would like to see a high school transition session for staff and parents. We could offer it statewide in Maryland. Is that an option? I mean, I think anything is on the table, Laura. So you could either fill out Hadley's staff request form, or you can contact NAFSCI about any kind of support you guys need from us. We are happy to help or connect you to Hadley and other talented speakers that we know. This has been amazing. Hadley, Marisa, thank you so much. You guys continue to awe and inspire me, and I'm really excited about how positive I feel about adolescence and middle school right now. I can't wait to go out and start telling everyone how awesome it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thanks for having
And
us.
I think
It's fun to hang out with so many people who love middle schoolers.
Yeah.
I think we have a post-webinar survey for you. This webinar was sponsored by the Collaborative for Action Family Engagement, another statewide family engagement center, and we are huge fans of theirs as well. We encourage you to take the survey because the data collected really helps them to improve our programs and sustain the funding that we receive, which is so important. So after the survey, after the webinar today, please take a minute to fill out the survey. There's a QR code on the screen, or you can follow the link. We are so appreciative to all of you for attending. Thank you again for joining us. If you registered for this event, you will get a copy of the slides in a PDF format and the recording in a few days once we've had time to compile all of that. Thank you again, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.